In the small village of Amango, the sun had just begun its descent, casting long shadows over the thatched roofs and dusty streets. Suddenly a woman rushes through the village streets, the sound of her hurried footsteps echoing loudly. She was Yuro, a well-known and respected woman in the village, who was sprinting through the narrow pathways, her heart pounding not just from the exertion but from the weight of the news she carried. "Yuro, what is it?" called out one of the villagers, but Yuro didn't stop. She had to get home. Breathless, she burst through the wooden gate of her compound, calling out loudly to everyone. "Everyone, come out. Come out now," she shouted. Her children and other family members, startled by the urgency in her voice, rushed out of their huts. Her eldest son, Amodi, handed her a cup of water. "Mama, what has happened?" he asked, his voice tinged with concern. Yuro took a long drink, trying to steady her breath. "Gather around, everyone. You won't believe what I've seen," she said, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and excitement. They all sat around her, the younger children sitting on the ground, the older ones and the adults standing or leaning against the wooden post of the house. "I have just come from Late Motsi Youth's compound. There is a huge crowd there. A woman has returned from the big city of Atema with her 2 children, and with Chimotsu, the daughter of Late Motsi Youth." Gasps of astonishment rippled through the group. "What happened there, Mama? Tell us everything," Amodi urged. Yuro nodded, taking another sip of water. "The woman's name is Yuriko. She said she had been living in the city with a young man for 8 years. All these years, she had been asking him about his family, but he always refused to talk about them, saying he was from a faraway place. They have 2 children and after 8 years, he finally agreed to take her and their children to meet his family." "Why did he hide his family for so long?" one of the children asked. "That is part of the mystery," Yuro replied. Yuriko was excited about the trip, and so were her children. The young man, her husband, told her that his sister lived in a house just on the next street from theirs. This surprised Yuriko because she couldn't understand why they had never visited his sister before. "What happened next, Mama?" Amodi prompted, his curiosity piqued. Yuro continued, her voice low and filled with suspense. On the morning they were to leave for the village, her husband told her that the driver would take them to his sister's place first, and she would join them on the journey. He said he had an urgent customer to attend to and would join them in the village the next day. Yuriko, who was excited at the thought of finally being introduced to her husband's family, was not discouraged by this sudden change in plans. She reluctantly agreed, and the driver took she and the children to the house which he said was his sister's house. Yuro paused, letting the tension build. When they arrived at the sister's house, they found Chimotsu there. Yuro paused, tapping her feet and snapping her fingers loudly. The evening in Amango grew darker, the stars beginning to twinkle in the sky as the family sat in silence, pondering the strange and unsettling tale Yuro had told. The air was thick with tension and unanswered questions that hung over the Yoro's family like a dark cloud, promising that this was just the beginning of a much larger story. After a deep sigh, Yuro continued. As they arrived at the house that her husband indicated belonged to his sister, Yuriko, accompanied by her 2 children, with each step, Yuriko's heart pounded with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She knocked on the door, and after a moment, it creaked open to reveal a young woman who looked at them with curiosity. "Hello," Yuriko began. "I am Yuriko, your brother Dubolu's wife. I'm sorry we are meeting this way for the first time. He was supposed to come with us, but he had a last-minute business to attend to. He said you will be expecting us. These are our children, Chechi and Lobi. Please, we are on our way to his village, and he asked that you join us." The woman stared at her in surprise for a brief moment. "I am Chimotsu," she said, recovering quickly. "Let me grab my bag." Chimotsu returned shortly with a small bag, and they all got into the vehicle. The journey to Amango was filled with the sounds of the children chattering and the hum of the engine, but Chimotsu didn't utter a word throughout the journey, and Yuriko couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over her. Upon their arrival, the villagers, recognizing Chimotsu, quickly gathered around, curious about her companions. Chimotsu asked all the oldest men and women in the clan to be summoned, and then she addressed the crowd, "My family and friends, this is Yuriko, she is my brother Dubolo's wife. She has come with their children to visit our village." The crowd's reaction was immediate and intense. A collective gasp followed by screams filled the air as people began to run in fear. Yuriko was confused and frightened by the sudden chaos. "Silence," commanded the oldest man in the family, Elder Nokidi. He approached Yuriko, his face etched with concern and bewilderment. "Everyone, calm down," he ordered. He asked Chimotsu to repeat what she had just said, and she briefly explained how Yuriko showed up at her house. Taking Yuriko's hand gently, Elder Nokidi led her and the elders to the back of the compound. They stopped before two graves, marked by simple stones. "These are the graves of my nephew, Dubolo, and his mother," Nokidi explained. 8 years ago, Dubolo was killed in a ghastly accident involving a huge truck right here in the village. We buried him in this grave. His mother, heartbroken, died 6 months later and was buried beside him. The man you have in that picture was buried in this grave 8 years ago." Yuriko's face drained of color as the truth hit her. She staggered and then collapsed to the ground. The villagers quickly gathered water and poured it on her, reviving her. She sat in shock, unable to speak, as people stared at her with a mix of pity and fear. Seeing her distress, Chimotsu stepped forward to explain her side of the story. "Last night, I had a vivid dream. In the dream, my brother Dubolo came to me. He told me that his wife and children would come to my house and beg me to bring them to the village and help them. I was confused, but when Yuriko arrived, I didn't know what to do. I felt compelled to follow his request. I wanted you all, my family, to help me understand this mystery." The villagers murmured among themselves, grappling with the impossible situation. They had all witnessed the tragic accident that took Dubolo's life and had been present at his funeral. How could Yuriko have lived with him for 8 years in the city after that, believing him to be alive? Elder Nokidi raised his hand for silence. "We must find an explanation. This situation is beyond our understanding. Could this be the work of an evil or familiar spirit? How can a spirit impregnate a human and live among them for so long?" As the villagers absorbed this revelation, a sense of resolve began to take hold. The journey to uncover the truth had only just begun, and they would need all their strength and unity to face the challenges ahead. Yuriko, holding her children's hands tightly, knew that the path forward would be filled with difficulties, but she also knew that she would do whatever it took to protect her family and honor the memory of the man she had loved, whether he had been human or spirit. She didn't know how to explain it. Her husband was real to her and their children were proof of that. But how could she explain the story about his death and his grave? The news of Chimotsu's return and the mysterious circumstances surrounding Yuriko's arrival spread like wildfire through the village of Amango. Ndiru's family, still reeling from her story, decided they had to see the woman and hear her story firsthand. Gathering their courage, they hurried to Motsi Youth's compound. As they approached, they saw a crowd gathered around a woman seated on the ground, her face buried in her hands as she cried. Yuriko's children clung to her, confused and scared by the commotion. The village elders stood nearby, their expressions a mix of concern, fear, and confusion. Elder Nokidi raised his hand for silence. "Let us hear from this woman. Yuriko, tell us about your family." Yuriko lifted her tear-streaked face, her eyes distant as if she were trying to recall a long-forgotten dream. "It's like I'm just waking up from a deep sleep," she began, her voice trembling. "I haven't thought about my parents for the past 8 years. It's as if they vanished from my mind. The villagers leaned in, eager to catch every word. I remember living in the town of Akuma with my parents, Yuriko continued. I was studying in a nursing school there. But I can't remember how or where I met Dubolo or how we started living together. It all feels like a dream. Am I dreaming? The villagers were shocked. How could someone forget their own family and life? The elders exchanged worried glances. Elder Nokidi spoke again. We must reach out to your family. They must have been looking for you all these years. We will send 2 young men to Akuma tomorrow to inform your parents of your whereabouts and everything that has happened. The villagers murmured in agreement. Nokidi turned to the 2 young men standing nearby. Is and Chuka, you will leave for Akuma tomorrow morning. Find Yuriko's family and bring them here. The young men nodded, understanding the gravity of their task. Nokidi then addressed Yuriko. You and your children are welcome to stay here in your late husband's family home if you choose to. We consider you part of our family now. Yuriko looked around, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. She saw the concerned faces of the villagers, the comforting presence of Chimotsu, and the innocent, trusting eyes of her children. She felt overwhelmed, unsure of what to do next. Mama, her eldest child, a boy named Kolechi, tugged at her sleeve. Are we going to stay here? Yuriko hugged him tightly. I don't know, my dear. Everything is so confusing. The crowd began to disperse, the villagers returning to their homes, though their minds were still racing with questions and theories. What kind of spirit had taken Dubolu's form? How had Yuriko been living a life that seemed to exist only in folktales and dreams? As the night fell, the family elders gathered in the Nokidi's house to discuss the next steps. Nokidi started the conversation. We have heard everything the young lady and Chimotsu said. We must also prepare for the arrival of Yuriko's family. They deserve to know the truth and to be reunited with their daughter. The other elders agreed, and plans were made for the 2 young men to travel and find Yuriko's family the next day. Meanwhile, Is and Chuka prepared for their journey to Akuma. The next morning, as the sun began to rise, the village was already bustling with activity. Yuriko and her children were given a place to stay in Chimotsu's house, where they would be safe and looked after. The villagers brought food and supplies, offering their support and comfort. Is and Chuka set off on their journey, their minds filled with the weight of their mission. The road to Akuma was long and winding, and they knew it would take most of the day to reach their destination. Later that evening, Is and Chuka arrived in Akuma. They asked around and were directed to the home of Yuriko's parents. The house was modest but well kept, and as they knocked on the door, they braced themselves for the difficult task ahead. A middle-aged woman opened the door, her eyes filled with worry as she saw the strangers. Can I help you? She asked. Good evening, ma'am, Is said respectfully. We are from the village of Amango. We have news about your daughter, Yuriko. The woman's eyes widened, and she called out to her husband. Chijioke, come quickly. It's about Yuriko. A tall man with graying hair appeared at the door, his expression turning from curiosity to shock. What do you know about our daughter? Is and Chuka explained everything, from Yuriko's arrival in the village to the strange circumstances surrounding her life with the spirit of Dubolo. The couple listened in stunned silence, tears streaming down the mother's face. We thought we had lost her forever, Chijioke said, his voice breaking. Thank you for bringing us this news. We must go to her at once. They welcomed the young men into their home, and early the next morning, Yuriko's parents arrived in Amango, escorted by Is and Chuka. The reunion was emotional, with tears and embraces as Yuriko's parents held their daughter and grandchildren for the first time in 8 years. I can't believe this is real, Yuriko's mother, Adana, said, her voice choked with emotion. We searched for you everywhere, prayed for your return. And now, here you are. Yuriko clung to her mother, tears streaming down her face. I don't understand any of this, Mama. It's like I was living in a dream, and now I've woken up. Chijioke embraced his daughter. We are just grateful you are safe. We will figure this out together. The villagers watched the reunion with a mix of joy and sorrow. The mystery of Dubolu's spirit still hung over them, but the sight of Yuriko reunited with her family brought a sense of closure to at least part of the story. Elder Nokidi addressed them. We have faced a great mystery and have come through it stronger as a family. Yuriko and her family are part of us now, and we will support them as they rebuild their lives. But for now, let us celebrate the return of Yuriko and the safety of her children. The villagers nodded in agreement. Yuriko sat with her parents and children, feeling a sense of peace for the first time in years. She knew there were still many questions left unanswered, but she also knew she was surrounded by people who loved her and would help her find those answers. She decided to return home with her parents, to give her time to understand everything that had happened. She thanked Elder Nokidi, Chimotsu, and the family members for their care and understanding. She promised to visit often and to explain to her children, so they would know their father's family. And so, the story of Yuriko, the woman who was married to a spirit, became a tale of mystery that no one has been able to explain. And Dubolu was never seen nor heard from ever again.